There are moments in life that redefine everything you think you know, moments so profound they leave a permanent imprint on your soul. This is one such moment, a testimony so powerful it will make you question what lies beyond this world. Imagine standing on the precipice of existence, where the boundaries of life and death blur and eternity begins to unfold. That's where this journey begins. The woman sharing her story wasn't ready for what happened to her. A routine day suddenly spiraled into the unimaginable, taking her to the very edge of life itself. She remembers feeling a deep, unshakable heaviness, a weight pressing down on her soul. And then, in an instant, everything changed. Her heart stopped, her vision dimmed, and her consciousness slipped away from her body. What followed was not the silence of nothingness, but the beginning of something extraordinary. She describes the first sensation as a profound stillness, almost as though the noise of the world had been stripped away. Darkness surrounded her, but it wasn't menacing. Instead, it felt like a pause, a space between two realities. And then came the light. At first, it was faint, like the flicker of a distant flame. Slowly, it grew stronger, illuminating her surroundings and drawing her toward it with a force she could not resist. This was no ordinary light. It pulsed with warmth and love, radiating an energy so pure it brought tears to her soul. In that moment, she understood. She was stepping into the presence of something far greater than herself. The light seemed alive, vibrant, and full of wisdom. As it enveloped her, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace, unlike anything she had ever known. Then, as though carried on the very waves of light itself, a voice emerged. It wasn't a voice she heard with her ears, but one that resonated deep within her spirit. It was gentle, yet commanding, filled with an authority that could not be questioned. The voice spoke directly to her soul. "Come, my child. There is something I must show you." Before she could fully comprehend what was happening, her surroundings began to shift. The light transformed, and she found herself in a realm that defied human understanding. It was as though every sense she had ever known was heightened. She could see, hear, and feel in ways that surpassed anything she had experienced on earth. It was then that she saw him, Jesus, not as a distant figure or a concept, but as a presence so real and tangible it left no room for doubt. His face radiated kindness, and his eyes carried the weight of eternity. Overcome by the sheer majesty of his presence, she fell to her knees, unable to do anything but weep in awe and gratitude. Jesus extended his hand, and with it came a love so profound it felt as though her entire being was lifted and healed. Then he spoke again, his voice filling her soul with both peace and urgency. "My child, I have brought you here not to punish, but to prepare. There is a message you must take back, a message for those who are still on earth. Time is short, and the world must be warned." As he spoke, she felt the gravity of his words settle deep within her heart. This was not just a vision, it was a mission. What happened next changed her forever. Jesus began to show her scenes, visions that were as vivid as they were heart-wrenching. She saw the lives of people, each moment a tapestry of choices and consequences. Joyful celebrations of love and faith were interwoven with heartbreaking scenes of pain and loss. Every image carried a meaning, a lesson, and a plea. She saw families divided by bitterness and souls consumed by worldly pursuits, unaware of the eternity that awaited them. She could feel their emotions as if they were her own, their longing, regret, and, most of all, their need for redemption. Jesus explained each vision with a tenderness that only deepened her understanding. He showed her the ripple effects of every action, the unseen connections between people, and the enduring power of love and faith. It was as though she was being given a glimpse of the eternal threads that hold the universe together. Yet, with each revelation, came a growing sense of urgency. The message was clear. The time to act was now. The choices people made in their everyday lives carried eternal weight, and the call to turn toward him was more urgent than ever. As the visions continued, she realized the enormity of what she was being shown. This was not just about her. It was about all of humanity. She was being entrusted with a truth so profound that it could change lives, save souls, and alter the course of eternity. The journey she had begun in darkness was now a beacon of hope and responsibility, and she knew she could never return to her old life unchanged. With every fiber of her being, she felt the call to share this testimony, to be a voice for those who might not yet hear the voice of Jesus for themselves. It was a burden and a blessing all at once, and she embraced it with a heart full of love and purpose. As she stood in his presence, her surroundings began to change once more, shifting into vivid, powerful scenes of what felt like both the past and the future. These were not just visions, they were truths unfolding before her, more real than anything she had ever known. This time, the focus was on humanity, their choices, their struggles, and the eternal consequences of their actions. Before her eyes appeared a world cloaked in shadow. Cities once filled with life now seemed barren, their streets eerily silent. It wasn't the silence of peace, but of despair, a spiritual emptiness that weighed heavily on everything. The buildings, though intact, seemed lifeless, as though stripped of their essence. Yet, within this darkness, she could see glimmers of light, small but unwavering, shining through the gloom. These lights represented individuals whose faith remained steadfast, even in the most trying times. Jesus turned to her, his expression a mix of sorrow and determination. "Do you see, my child?" he asked, his voice both gentle and commanding. "Even in the darkest hours, my light remains, but the world must choose. Will they embrace the light, or will they continue to turn away?" His words resonated deeply within her, each syllable carrying a weight that pressed upon her soul. She realized that humanity's future wasn't fixed. It depended entirely on the choices they made. Every decision, no matter how small, created ripples that extended far beyond what anyone could see. Suddenly, she was transported again. This time, she found herself on a vast, endless plain. The sky above was alive with radiant colors, more brilliant than any earthly sunrise. Before her stretched a sea of people, a multitude too great to count. Their faces reflected a spectrum of emotions, anticipation, awe, fear, and hope. It was as though all of humanity had gathered here, waiting for a moment that would define eternity. At the center of it all stood Jesus, but not as the gentle shepherd she had seen before. Now, he was the King of Kings, the righteous judge of all creation. His presence was overwhelming, commanding every eye to turn toward him and every knee to bow. She watched, her heart heavy yet hopeful, as the crowd was divided into two groups. Those on the right glowed with joy and peace, their faces lit with the knowledge that they were entering into eternal glory. Their expressions spoke of relief, gratitude, and a love that could not be contained. On the left, however, the scene was starkly different. These were the ones gripped by despair, their cries echoing across the heavens. They begged for another chance, their voices filled with regret and anguish. But the time for choosing had passed, and the finality of their fate was undeniable. It was a heart-wrenching sight, and tears filled her eyes as she witnessed their sorrow. Jesus turned to her once more. His gaze was both compassionate and resolute. "The harvest is near, but the workers are few," he said. "Go, my child, and share what you have seen. Tell them that I am coming soon, and my love is still reaching out to them. There is still time, but they must act." These words burned into her spirit, filling her with an urgency she had never felt before. She understood that she had been entrusted with a mission, one of eternal significance, and it was a task she could not ignore. The vision shifted yet again, and she found herself standing at the edge of time itself. Here, she saw glimpses of lives being lived out, choices being made, prayers being answered, and moments of both triumph and failure. It was as though she was being shown the interconnectedness of all things, how every action influenced another, creating a tapestry of human experience. She saw people rising above their struggles through faith, their lives transformed by the love and grace of Jesus. She also saw others lost in despair, their hearts hardened by pain and pride. The contrast was stark, and it underscored the gravity of the choices humanity faced. As the vision began to fade, she found herself back in the realm of light, standing before Jesus. He placed his hand gently on her shoulder, and in that moment she felt a peace that defied understanding. Every wound, every fear, every burden she had ever carried was lifted. It was as though she was being made whole, not just physically, but spiritually. "You are not alone," he said. "I will be with you always, guiding you, strengthening you, and giving you the words to speak. Trust in me, and do not be afraid." With those words, the light around her began to dim, and she felt herself being drawn back into her body. The transition was abrupt, like waking from a dream that was more vivid than reality itself. She opened her eyes to find herself surrounded by her loved ones, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. They had been praying fervently, asking God to bring her back. What they didn't know was that their prayers had been answered in a way far beyond what they could have imagined. In the days that followed, she struggled to put her experience into words. How could she describe something so profound, so otherworldly? It was more than a vision. It was a reality that had changed her forever. Yet she knew she had to try. This wasn't just her story. It was a message for the world. As she began to share her testimony, she encountered a range of reactions. Some people listened with open hearts, their eyes filled with tears as they felt the truth of her words. Others were skeptical, dismissive, or even hostile. But she pressed on, understanding that her job was not to convince everyone, but to faithfully deliver the message she had been given. Through it all, she held on to the promise Jesus had made to her, "I will be with you always." Those words became her anchor, her source of strength when doubt or fear threatened to overwhelm her. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew it would be worth it. For every soul that turned to Jesus, every life that was transformed, was a victory in the kingdom of heaven. Her testimony began to spread, touching lives in ways she could never have anticipated. People who heard her story found hope, comfort, and a renewed sense of purpose. They were reminded of the love and grace that Jesus offers to all, and many were inspired to share that love with others. Her mission, she realized, was not just about recounting her experience, but about igniting a fire of faith in the hearts of those who heard her. As she continued her journey of sharing the profound experience she had in the presence of Jesus, her understanding deepened. She began to see how her story wasn't just about her. It was about the countless lives it could touch. Every time she spoke, she felt the Holy Spirit guiding her words, infusing them with power and grace that resonated with her listeners. Yet this mission came with challenges. There were moments of doubt and exhaustion, times when the weight of her responsibility felt almost too much to bear. But each time she knelt in prayer, seeking strength and clarity, she felt the unmistakable presence of Jesus lifting her burdens. He reminded her of what she had seen, the light piercing through the darkness, the eternal hope that could transform even the most broken lives. These reminders reignited her passion, fueling her determination to press on. One of the most impactful moments in her journey occurred during a gathering where she shared her testimony with a group of young people. The room was filled with an air of curiosity and skepticism, as many of them had never encountered someone who spoke so openly about matters of faith. She began by recounting the visions Jesus had shown her, the division of the crowd, the cries of those left behind, and the joy of those welcomed into his presence. As she described the love and compassion in Jesus' eyes, she noticed a young man sitting in the back, his arms crossed and his expression guarded. Yet, as she continued, something shifted. His posture relaxed, and tears began to stream down his face. After the session, he approached her, his voice trembling as he said, "I've always felt unworthy of love, like my mistakes defined me. But hearing your story, I realized that Jesus' love is bigger than my failures." This was just one of many encounters that reaffirmed the importance of her mission. Her testimony wasn't just words, it was a lifeline for those drowning in despair, a beacon for those lost in the darkness. Each person who heard her story became part of a ripple effect, their lives touched in ways that only God could orchestrate. But the road wasn't always smooth. There were those who ridiculed her, dismissing her testimony as nothing more than a dream or an overactive imagination. Some accused her of seeking attention, while others questioned her motives. These criticisms stung, but she remembered the words of Jesus. "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me." These words became her shield, protecting her heart and keeping her focused on the greater purpose. As her story spread, she began receiving invitations to speak at churches, conferences, and even community events. Each opportunity brought new challenges, but also new blessings. She learned to rely not on her own strength, but on the grace of God, which was more than sufficient for every situation. Her message remained consistent. Jesus is coming soon, and his love is still reaching out to everyone, no matter their past or present circumstances. One evening, as she prepared to speak at a large gathering, she found herself reflecting on the vision of the plain where humanity had been divided. The cries of those left behind still echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of the stakes at hand. She prayed fervently, asking God to guide her words and touch the hearts of those in attendance. When she stepped onto the stage, she felt a calmness wash over her, a reassurance that she wasn't speaking alone. Jesus was with her, just as he had promised. She began by addressing the fear and uncertainty that many people feel when they think about the end times. "I understand how overwhelming it can be," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But what Jesus showed me isn't meant to instill fear, it's meant to inspire hope. He doesn't want anyone to be left behind. His love is so vast, so unconditional, that it reaches even the most broken hearts. All we have to do is open ourselves to it." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd. As she spoke, she saw tears in the eyes of many and heard quiet whispers of prayer. At the end of her testimony, she invited anyone who felt moved to come forward and pray. Dozens of people stepped forward, their faces reflecting a mix of vulnerability and hope. Among them was a young mother holding the hand of her small child, an elderly man with trembling hands, and a teenager clutching a journal. Each one represented a life on the brink of transformation, a soul that had been touched by the message of Jesus' love and grace. These moments were the fuel that kept her going. She understood that her story wasn't just hers. It was a testimony to the power of God's love and a reminder of the urgency of the gospel. She often told her audience, "This isn't about religion or rules. It's about relationship, about knowing the one who created you, loves you, and has a purpose for your life." As the weeks turned into months, her mission expanded. She began working with churches and ministries to create spaces where people could ask questions, share their doubts, and explore their faith. She partnered with community organizations to reach those who might never step foot in a church, bringing the message of hope to schools, shelters, and even prisons. Her message remained the same, but the ways she delivered it became more diverse, ensuring that no one was excluded. One day, as she reflected on everything that had happened since her encounter with Jesus, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She thought about the countless lives that had been touched, the seeds of faith that had been planted, and the hope that had been rekindled in hearts around the world. She knew that the journey was far from over, but she also knew that she wasn't walking it alone. Jesus was with her every step of the way, guiding her, strengthening her, and reminding her of the eternal significance of her mission. As her journey unfolded, she began to see the broader impact of her testimony, not just in individual lives, but across entire communities. Her message of hope and redemption resonated far beyond church walls, reaching people in unexpected places. Hospitals, schools, and even online forums became platforms for her to share the love and truth she had experienced. Each setting brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to witness the transformative power of Jesus' message. One of the most memorable moments of her ministry occurred during a visit to a youth rehabilitation center. The room was filled with young faces, many of them hardened by life experiences that seemed far too heavy for their age. As she began to speak, she could sense their skepticism. They had heard words of encouragement before, but often felt let down by empty promises and fleeting hope. She shared the vision of the plain, the division of humanity, the anguish of those left behind, and the joy of those who had chosen to follow Christ. But she didn't stop there. She spoke of the immense love she had felt in Jesus' presence, a love that was greater than any mistake, stronger than any regret. "You are not defined by your past," she told them. "Jesus sees you, knows you, and loves you right where you are. He's offering you a fresh start, a new beginning." Her words broke through the walls they had built around their hearts. One young man, who had been slouched in his chair with a defiant expression, suddenly sat up. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "Could he really love someone like me?" She knelt beside him, looking into his eyes with compassion. "He already does," she said gently, "more than you can imagine." That encounter was a turning point, not just for the young man, but for many others in the room. It became clear to her that this mission wasn't just about preparing people for the return of Christ. It was about showing them that His love was already here, reaching out to them in their brokenness. Despite these victories, the weight of her mission often felt overwhelming. She spent countless hours in prayer, asking God for strength, wisdom, and guidance. The visions she had seen, the joy of the redeemed and the sorrow of the lost, were never far from her mind. They fueled her determination, but also reminded her of the urgency of her message. Time was short, and the stakes were eternal. Her journey also brought moments of deep, personal reflection. She thought about her own life, the choices she had made, and the ways God had worked through her weaknesses. She realized that her testimony wasn't just about what she had seen, but also about how her own life had been transformed. She began to share more openly about her struggles, her doubts, and the times she had felt unworthy of God's love. These admissions made her message even more powerful, as people saw that she wasn't speaking from a place of perfection, but from a place of grace. As her ministry grew, so did the resistance she faced. There were those who dismissed her as a fanatic, accusing her of fear-mongering or sensationalism. Others tried to discredit her by pointing out inconsistencies or challenging the validity of her experiences. These attacks were painful, but she refused to let them deter her. She reminded herself of the countless lives that had been changed, the seeds of faith that had been planted, and the hope that had been rekindled in hearts around the world. She also found solace in the words of Jesus. "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first." These words became a source of strength, a reminder that her mission wasn't about seeking approval, but about being faithful to the calling she had received. She knew that obedience to God often meant walking a path that was misunderstood by others. One evening, as she prepared to speak at a conference, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She stood backstage, praying for the hearts of those who would hear her message. When she stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. She began to speak, not from a script, but from her heart, sharing the urgency of her vision and the hope that had been rekindled in her own life. "Jesus is coming soon," she told them, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And he's calling each of us to be ready, not out of fear, but out of love. He wants us to live lives that reflect his grace, to be lights in the darkness, and to share his message with a world that desperately needs it." The audience was captivated. Some nodded in agreement, while others wiped away tears. At the end of her talk, she invited them to take a step of faith, whether it was committing their lives to Christ for the first time or renewing their dedication to him. The response was overwhelming. People flooded the front of the room, kneeling in prayer, their hearts open to the love and mercy of Jesus. As she watched, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. This was why she had been given her vision, not to instill fear, but to ignite faith, not to condemn, but to inspire. She realized that her testimony wasn't just about warning people of what was to come, but about showing them the beauty and power of living a life transformed by God's love. Her journey continued, filled with both challenges and triumphs. She remained committed to her calling, trusting that God would use her story to reach those who needed it most. And as she looked back on all that had happened since her encounter with Jesus, she knew one thing for certain: his message was worth sharing, no matter the cost.